So, as I said, we'll be covering 6 questions today. And after each question, I'll stop. Please feel free to ask any immediate or pressing questions that you might have. Otherwise, we'll carry on and we'll take your questions at the end. So the first one that I want to come on to, and I'll be looking to you firstly, if I could, Marina, is as we look at the global regulatory landscape and the emerging trends, there is no one standard for nicotine pouches worldwide. Can you give us your view in how you would marry the science and the regulations and the trends that you're spotting globally? And so after you, Marina, I'll come to you if I could, Pete.
Actually, I think I'll let Peter talk about the different regulatory trends, because what I wanted to talk about just initially to start off was to talk about the importance of scientific evidence and science in the creation of regulation and the rules around tobacco and nicotine. Because, of course, there's a lot of talk about evidence-based regulation, as there should be. But, of course, it all depends on the evidence. So it depends on what evidence you use. Sometimes regulators don't like the evidence, and sometimes they misinterpret the evidence. So I think that we're in a position, in a good position in a way with nicotine pouches, in that we're sort of not quite at the very beginning, but at the start of the regulatory journey, whereby there is a lot of opportunity to create the evidence and the science to ensure that the regulatory frameworks that do come around the corner are, beneficial to the sector, in that we're able to sell our product and we're able to talk about our product. So I just wanted to use 2 examples of where scientific evidence was not used correctly or was misinterpreted in the context of vapes, because of course, vapes have been regulated for a long time, and we're very much further down the road, but we've also seen a lot of things go wrong with science. So I just wanted to talk about 2 things, and they both involve Europe. So if we think about the Tobacco Products Directive, which is sort of like the overarching guideline for member states, it tells them or gives them the rules on how they should govern, tobacco and nicotine products. And if we think about the very first TPD, which was 20-something years ago, so there wasn't e-cigarettes or nicotine pouches, so it was pretty much focused on tobacco. And one of the things that they did in the first TPD was they banned a product called snus, which is the precursor of nicotine pouches. So they banned this product on the basis that it was going to attract children, which is something that we hear all the time, but also because they didn't embrace the science, and there was decades of science already at that stage to demonstrate that snus was vastly safer than cigarettes. And we've seen that now in the 2 decades since. We've seen how Swedish men and increasingly women have switched from smoking to snus, and they have the lowest levels of most cancers in the Western world. So that's number 1 example of how science was not used correctly. And then number 2 example is also TPD. So the next iteration of the TPD, TPD2, they decided, well, we must have e-cigarettes in here, and that was about 2014, something like that, or before that. So e-cigarettes were very new, and they were like, okay, what do we do with this product? How do we regulate it? What's the science? So one of the things they wanted to do was look at how much nicotine will we allow in the product. So they found a paper, and they decided that this paper is telling us that if we have a limit of 20 milligrams per mil, that's going to be equivalent to a cigarette. So that was number 1 mistake, because the person who wrote that paper wrote to the Commission and said, you've misinterpreted my science, that's not what it means. And number 2 mistake they made was that they were trying to compare cigarettes and e-cigarettes, but cigarettes are regulated on the basis of what comes out of them, but they regulate e-cigarettes on the basis of what goes into them, so they're basically trying to compare apples and oranges. So that was mistake number 2. So then we were in the position of having a nicotine ceiling of 20 milligrams per mil, which in the scheme of things didn't make that much difference because we innovated around it. But you can see how science is important in the creation of regulation. But the other thing I would say is that although the industry has regulated around that limit, it could have been a rate limiting step for the industry. And not just because it was wrong, because the science was interpreted incorrectly, but also because that one regulator made that decision. And in the decade since, we see that number crop up around the world. So one mistake in one place doesn't just mean one mistake in one place. It can mean many mistakes around the world for many years afterwards.